Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight for our webinar on breaking down the CV for academia. Tonight, we're going to be talking about when to use a CV, and also what should go into it, and what are the things that really shouldn't be included in a CV. And we're focusing tonight really on academia. So it's not only people who are going to grad school, which is obviously probably the biggest reason that I see people looking to do a CV, but it's also people who are looking to maybe work in a, maybe they're looking for, a faculty position or a research position, or things like that. So there's definitely some reasons both within academia and external, but we're going to really focus largely on the academic ones. So thanks for being here with us today. I'd like to start by just having you take a moment to think about what is a CV? What do you know, or how would you define a CV and when it's used? So take just a moment and write that if you can in the chat box. CV equals, right? And when is it used? When do you use it? So just take a stab at that and we'll keep going. Thanks. We kind of talked a little bit about when it's used already, right? Just in the intro, but what is a CV? Like what does it even stand for? What are the words CV? The letters, I should say, CV stand for. Curriculum vitae, yes, absolutely, Andrea. Used to highlight academic achievements, work, exactly. It's more used for the academic achievements, and there's lots of different categories within that. It's not just your course of study. It includes everything from presentations, research, publications, all kinds of things. Absolutely. Good. Detailed work and education history used in other areas too, I think. Yep. No, you're right. You're right. Absolutely. Good. So you have a grip on it already, right? So it's Latin for course of life, right? So what I loved this way of describing it, everything that qualifies you as an expert in your field, right? So it's very specialized. You're using a CV when you're, going for, education, when you're going for, maybe a faculty type of position where it's really focused on your, not so much it is your experience, but not so much your work experience, but more oftentimes it's more emphasizing your academic achievement, your different kinds of of research, publications, all of those kinds of things that are very oftentimes associated with academia, right? Presentation. So it's really all of your achievements. So of course it's much longer, right? And what's interesting is CVs traditionally have been very long, right? And if you're really including everything, it's going to be extremely long, right? Some institutions and some places are starting to ask for limits. Like they want you to put a limit on how long it is. So they might give you a 4-page or a 2-page limit, something like that, so that, and you obviously want to stay within whatever confines they give you. I mean, that's one of the most important things, right? When you're applying, you want to have them, you want to show them that what they're what they're asking for. You're listening to directions, things like that. So now some of you might be saying, oh gosh, 4 pages, I could easily get everything into that, right? And others of you are probably thinking, wow, I've had extensive experience, it's going to be hard to even think about limiting it. But you keep on the most relevant, obviously, right? And we'll talk a lot more about what goes into it, what can come off of it, what should and shouldn't be a part of it. So let's just continue on here. This is a slide that I had in our last week's presentation, and I'm including it really briefly because I think it does give a good description of when each of them is used, right? And what it emphasizes. So resumes are more emphasizing your skills, like your work skills, right? Your professional experience, right? Whereas the CV is more of an emphasis on your academic achievements, right? And those related kinds of accomplishments that I was just mentioning. So resumes are used pretty much, here in the States, resumes are the norm. CVs are more academia, right? Fellowships, like I was talking about, last week, grants, all those kinds of things, right? You might also use it for research, a position that's even outside of academia, maybe a research position. They might want more of a CV because they want your publications, your work on a certain research area, your research interest, and all of those are CV related. So resumes, now this graphic says they're no longer than 2 pages, and I would say in general, I would agree with that you'd want to keep it to 2 pages. You don't have to go back to your entire work history because, quite honestly, generally employers in the traditional resume, arena where they're expecting that, they're most interested in your last 10, 15 years of experience. That's really what they're interested in. So it shouldn't have to go too much past 2 pages if you just keep it to that more recent, right? And then with the CV, there's really not a generally there's not like a you must have a CV, your CV must be X pages, right? But like I said, different institutions are starting to put those into place. So they might say, oh, here at SIT we allow a 2-page CV, but it's not there's much more flexibility with it, and you're putting in all that additional information. So it just depends on what your experience is and how how much that takes to describe. You're not going into quite as much detail either, though, as oftentimes you do with even your jobs and such. It's more kind of formulaic of research interest, research experience, publications, and we'll see that later when I go through an example with you where we actually go through a one to have you take a look at it. So with resumes, and I like that they say here that after a year that the education would go down to it would go after your professional experience. I'm actually an advocate of your education going after your professional experience for non-academia focused jobs from the get-go. Because here's what it screams when it goes right up there: education. When it's not a CV, it's like a resume, right? And in that arena, when you have your education first and foremost, you're saying my education is the most important thing I have, more than experience, all of that. And sometimes, I should say a lot of times, they're trying to weed out people because they have hundreds of people applying. And how many of you haven't seen jobs? Most of the jobs that you see might say bachelor's required, bachelor's required, master's preferred. Some of them nowadays will say master's required, right? But even if it says bachelor's required, master's preferred, if you're going up against 200 other people and the other competition has their master's, a lot of them do you really think it's going to be tough to get into that pool of to be considered further, the people who are actually going to get considered for an interview, if you don't have that? Because if your education's up front, because they see it and they instantly think new grad, no experience, right? So I'm more for many of the Peace Corps volunteers, right, RPCVs that I work with, and I've worked with where they've gone into Peace Corps pretty much right out of college. Yes, they're a recent grad, but they have Peace Corps or they have other experiences, internships, and all kinds of things that can really, they can emphasize and they can put those on under their professional experience, right? It's not whether it's paid or not, whether it can go on your your professional experience category. So I prefer to have people put it afterwards. And then my extra trick is always to have you list 2 entries. So if you have a master's, easy. You say you have your master's first, right? Reverse chronological. And then you have your bachelor's or whatever, right? The second one. If you don't have a master's, maybe you have an associate's degree. Maybe you transferred colleges when you were in the middle of whatever year of study. Whatever it is, put it down, because when you have 2 entries, guess what it does? And this is my tip that I give to people. And yet I will fall prey to this when I am looking through and scanning resumes at a glance. What am I going to think when I see 2 entries? Automatically, anyone? 2 entries, 2 education entries. What am I thinking? Anyone?
More educated?
Yes, masters. Because you don't put your high school diploma on there. So it's when I see 2, I'm assuming that it's a master's and a bachelor's. And and you're not, believe it or not, I think you would understand this, when they're giving the entire resume a 6-second glance, generally that's what stats show. 6 to 8 seconds that they're looking at the resume before they make that decision of whether you're going to go into that to be considered further pile, or as I always say, the circular file, AKA trash, right? They're not going to be able to have time to go, oh, let's see, Indiana University, what year? No, that's going to take the whole time. They're going to glance and they're going to see 2 entries and be like, oh, good, they have education, whatever. And you're not lying. You're putting exactly what's out there. But here's the deal. If you have that bachelor's and you get to that interview, you're going to wow them with your greatness, your Peace Corps flexibility, and all of those great skills that you have. And it's not going to matter, right? So that's my tip on normal resumes. CVs, quite different, because CVs definitely the education is up front.
Jodi,
Sorry, did somebody have a question?
yeah, can I ask a quick question? I
Yeah.
suspect you answered this in a different webinar, if you
Sure.
could refer me.
No problem.
LinkedIn, Indeed, I think it was probably Indeed, maybe LinkedIn too. They are looking for certain words in the resumes, and my resume is not
Keywords.
populating their thing.
Mhm.
You covered that in a different webinar.
Are you talking about more of like the applicant tracking systems, ATS systems, where they're like scanning the computers first to scan and see if you're going to even make it to that? Yep. I
Yes.
actually have a webinar on that, on ATS. I think it's called Beating the ATS, or Writing a Resume to Beat the ATS System, I think is what it's called. And I bet Hannah's probably on it right now, looking at our YouTube, and she'll probably dump that into the chat box for you to take a look at a different time. But yeah, that's an important concept because some do the ATS. And one thing that's important with resume writing is if they use the ATS, you want to make sure that you're providing those keywords, right? And that you're providing it in the format that they are requesting. And if they're not requesting a specific format, choosing a format that is, going to be readable by ATS, systems. And from what I understand, I'm not an expert at all in that, but I do know that many of them, what I've read is that many of them are now more able to read PDFs. Because typically when I talk to people about resume writing, I say, get everything all set, you get it all pretty and how it looks, where it's exactly like you want it to look. And then you turn it into a PDF so that it's not going to change. Because how many of you have sent a resume in and you have it in the version and it looks so pretty on yours, and you send it in and then you go back and you open it or whatever, and it shows like that one line, like on the second page. You had worked so hard to get it to a one-page resume, and then it has one line on the second page. Like, that's just not fun, right? So if you do a PDF, it's not going to do that. It's going to show exactly as you liked it, as you had it. But with that used to be more of a problem with ATS systems because they weren't able to read PDFs, but they've gotten more and more advanced. And I think now the majority can read them. Do a little research on that yourself. But that's one question that you could always check when you're networking and you're like tapping into your LinkedIn connections and friends of friends, and really finding people who are maybe working at certain organizations where you can ask them, does your company use an ATS, applicant tracking system? Do you know by chance? And are they able to read, a PDF, when you are able to, connect with them? And you can
assume they are when I upload my resume and they say that they're going to translate it and nothing below is correct.
And nothing below is correct. What do you mean? I'm sorry.
They say upload your resume.
Yep.
And
in what format? Nothing, just.
And we will populate our application with your resume.
Oh.
Comes out right. I've had that with Methodist Hospital, and I think it was LinkedIn or Indeed. I think it was Indeed. I did that, and it was the same thing.
So do they have an option for you to go in and actually populate it the old-fashioned way where you're doing it? I mean, great, do it. I mean, I don't know why, but sometimes they don't work. But yeah, if you have that other option, you can probably make it look prettier anyway. Because I think my concern with having them totally take it and just populate it is, they could have really crazy, weird. I don't know. I mean, I'm still a little hesitant about ATS. How smart are they? Maybe they're really smart, but yeah, at least you have that option then where you can do that. Yeah. But watch that webinar, and there are some really good ones online as well. If you need some more of those, like if you find some, or if you run into a dead end, email me too, because I know that like I have some of the resources that I used for that one that I might be able to share with you, so you can always email me. And Hannah, can you just drop my email into the box, either the rpcv.org is the the easier one, but either one. Thank you so much. Awesome. Any other questions before we move ahead?
Yes, there's 2 questions in the chat box.
Okay.
One is, so if I only use the same CV, should I change the order depending on whether it is an academic job or other?
So if I only, use the same CV, should I change the order? Well, actually, Riverine, I would recommend, like when you say use the same CV, you're probably talking about the format of it, but I'm a big believer in tailoring it to the job that you're going for. So you're very rarely, if ever, using the exact same CV, your resume, right? You're going to be tailoring it to whatever that job is. But to make it easier, you can always choose the job that you've applied for in the past that's most similar and start with that as your base resume, right? Instead of going back to the big one, your master, and trying to do everything again, that takes a long time, all of that. Start with the one and then that's most similar, and then tweak it from there. So absolutely, so yes. But in terms of the when, like what goes first, what I would say, the order, if it's an academic job, like a support position or something, in the administration, whatever of the university, you could have it similar to what your regular one is, right? You might actually even use a resume, and that we'll get to that a little bit later, instead of a CV. But when you're going for an actual like CV, like a professor or the research types of positions there, that kind of thing, then you would definitely want to use the full CV. And I think this is worthy of talking just a moment on as well. So there's a lot of confusion between CV and resume, right? People use them interchangeably, including employers, including your recruiters, right? Because some recruiters and stuff, start using CV because they think it's like the hip way to refer to a resume. It's the modern resume, right? So they say, send your CV. And I think that's right, but that's more progressive. Well, it just confuses people, including myself, because a CV is not the same as a resume, like we've been talking about, right? Your CV emphasizes much more of your academic accomplishments, your publications, your research, your all of those kinds of things, right? Your research interests, all of that. And the resume more is what emphasizes your job skills and your experience. So I would say, if you're going for more of, for maybe like a project manager in their whatever department, I would probably use more of the resume type of style, or I would try to get from them if they prefer, like, they might say in the, fine print, submit, what style they want. They might have a phone number or an email that you can actually ask a question. And you could say, I'm really excited about the XYZ position as posted in da, 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 da. Just want to verify whether you're looking for a traditional CV or a, resume, and see what they say too. So you can sometimes get that from them. Okay, great. Okay. And the last thing I didn't really say on here with the CV, but you obviously read it, you always begin with the education. I mean, after your contact information, but a CV, a true CV, will start with your education, right? And even include, if you have your dissertation, whatever, your advisor, those kinds of things. So okay, great. And just this one I really liked from last week, just because I think it, just the graphic of it, like resume, think work experience, the tie, right? And the other one, think academia, and what the audience is, and all of that. I like how it's formatted, and it's pretty concise, right? How are they different, all of that. So yeah. And it's interesting because the CV, and we talked about this a little more last week when we were talking about the fellowships, it sometimes with CVs, there'll be the long paragraphs, and other times there's the bullets. I prefer the bullets still, or very short paragraphs, because I feel like otherwise you just, your eye gets tired. But yeah, and we'll talk more about this in a moment. So the cover letter point at the end, I do want to say, I am a strong believer in a cover letter, and for a variety of reasons. I believe when I have been on hiring panels, right, or when I was in Peace Corps headquarters, and we were looking at who we wanted to bring in. For me, if somebody doesn't submit a cover letter, it kind of, I mean, I feel like it kind of sends that message that, okay, I'm applying, but I'm going to do the bare minimum to get this application in. It didn't say I had to do a cover letter, so I'm not going to do it. And I just feel like you're losing this opportunity to really be able to plug for yourself in a way that is, more, a genuine, and you can show that you can write, because let's face it, resumes are not complete sentences. Even they're not, good demonstrations of how well you write the English language. So in your cover letter, if you can make that more compelling, and upfront, and really, kind of go through it concisely. And then in the end, it allows you to have that ask, right? I would welcome the opportunity for an interview, at which time we can further discuss my XYZ, my proven interest in in this position. Please contact me at, whatever. You can like kind of ask for that and show them you're really interested. You're willing to go above and beyond, right? And some are now requiring it. So, that's something as well. But even if they don't, I'm just a big believer, because here's the deal. Nobody's going to say, oh, I can't believe this Andrea did a cover letter, I'm not going to talk to her. No. I mean, it's going to push them regardless. In, if nothing else, it would just be a neutral. Like, they don't look at it. And that happens sometimes. I'm sure you've heard that when you've talked to people. Oh, we don't even look at cover letters. Or we look at them when we, have kind of a tie between two. We're not sure who to bring in for the interview, and then we'll look at it. But why put yourself into that possible to be overlooked, right? Because other people are like, no, I'm going to look at the people who, really cared enough to do the, the cover letter and set themselves apart. Especially, I mean, when you are going for a marketing position or a communications position, you absolutely want to do, that cover letter too, to really show another way of showing that, you know what you're talking about, right? Great. I notice here, before we go on, Megan had asked, can study abroad also work as a second entry? That is great, Megan. Absolutely. And that's perfect. You have your study abroad, but how you want to list it is not study abroad in bold. You want to have the university, whatever the university was, in bold, just like, your university, and you want to be the same style. So then you would have your maybe your University of Northern Iowa, and then, location, whatever. And then, your stuff under that. And then, Universidad de San Francisco, Quito, Ecuador, whatever, as the second one. And when they see that, they're not seeing, study abroad in bold. So again, it can help you toward that. So absolutely, Megan, that's great. And you know what, if you don't have that either, and you feel like, oh, I don't have anything, I can't put anything. Yes, you do. You can always put your Peace Corps pre-service training. Peace Corps pre-service training, an intensive 3-month, training program consisting of 75 hours of blah, 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 right? That is your second entry. Now, in that case, I do recommend breaking the reverse chronological and putting your actual university one first, and then the Peace Corps pre-service training. But it's a great one. So there are ways to get around that as well. Yep. Awesome. Let's see here. Yes, thank you for your questions. Keep them coming. If they spend six seconds looking at a CV, do they actually read cover letters? Very good question, right? What they're doing is they're spending 6 seconds, right, to see if you gel with what they're looking for, whatever. Some people won't read a cover letter. Other people will be like, wow, I like this. I want to actually see how they write, or I want to see, so they'll go to it. So you can't guarantee just by doing it that they're going to read it. But I'm definitely a staunch advocate of doing it regardless. And it's not that hard, especially if you use, and I'm not saying to use a fill-in template where it's the same thing and you just change the name of the organization and the name of, the position, or forget to, and that's really embarrassing, right? You miss out on that job when you forget to do that. But I'm talking about a very tailored one. So if you go in and if you're focusing on, maybe one of your areas of focus is, I don't know, maybe it's training and development, and another focus is program management. you could do take the position that was closest, that you've done in the past, tailor that one just slightly, right? For the new keywords to make sure that you get in there those keywords that they're looking for. Sometimes you can even bold those keywords, just FYI, if you're trying to kind of, if you're worried about them not being able to like read the whole cover letter or taking the time. I've had people who've written like, you don't want more than a page and you want actually less than a page, but it's really hard to do that. So if you have a lengthy cover letter, if you bold those certain skill things and phrases like, 3 years of project management experience, whatever it is, you throughout, it can allow them to scan it and just be like, oh, great, right? And see that. Does that make sense? I hope. Hannah, are there any others any other questions that have come in so far?
No, you've got them all.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. So let's go on. I showed this one, and I'm going to go, this is the last one that's the same here that I had shared in last week's, but I like it because it kind of shows the structure of how a CV might look, right? What it might look, especially up on top, right? Where you'd have your name as the biggest thing on the, on the page, your contact information. And then this goes into like resume versus CV, but up there you would have, whether it's your, summary or your, I'm not a fan of objectives. I hate objectives because in the traditional resume, they just have become, they you used to put something like a rewarding position with XYZ company with opportunities for growth and advancement. Well, no, duh, you want a job, right? And of course you're going to put that you want the job with this company. So it's like, it doesn't tell anything about you. So instead I like either key qualifications or summary of qualifications, and then have your first part, your first bullet, or what's right underneath your name, however you decide to do it, as an adjective and a noun with, and then what your education is. If you have a master's or MPH and X years of specialized skills in right? So that they get that right up front, and then the other specialized skills that you have. That's kind of my tip. But in a CV, a lot of times you might start with, they might label it objective, or they might label it just, profile, right? But it really goes right out. Really, it's not a drawn out one, like where you have bullets and all of that, if at all, because you really hop right into the education header for true CVs, right? So you go right into the education and you go into those kind of things, which we're going to show you. I'm going to show you a sample actually. And then you'll have your different headers, right? And have that space. I like having this blank space before, each header, so that there's a little bit of a nice pause for the eye. But this on the bottom here, I like because it does have, look at all that stuff you should include. Of course, it's going to be a lot longer, right? in addition to your contact information, and your education, all those things that you expect, the honors awards, your publications, presentation, all of that, right? Research interest, clinical, interest. That's oftentimes when you're going for like a research, what do you call it? Like fellowships or research, RAs, right? Research assistants, like yeah, exactly. All of that. So there's lots of stuff to include there in education. I like to include the computer skills and some of those maybe specialized skills separate from the education, because that can be a separate header down toward the bottom that can be kind of end strong, right? If you have good, computer skills and things like that, include those, right? If you're going for research positions, stats, all of those kinds of things are, of course, pretty essential. So and then you have your category for your professional experience too, where you're going to put what you've done and all of that, but it's going to really, this other is so much bigger, right, up front. So I'm going to show you a couple examples here in a minute. But now references, I do want to say one thing about references are something that you used to include the reference, their name, relationship to you, contact information, all of that in your CV. That's changed in a sense. Many now just what you should do is I prefer to have a separate document, right? That just is titled, professional references for Jodi Hammer. And then you have your different references, their names, their relationship to you, right? former supervisor, things like that, right? And then their contact information, i.e., phone and email. To either, now, if they want it right up front, you obviously, you submit it. If they don't necessarily request it, get a feel for whether or not, that is something in that company you could, but you might just be prepared to submit it when needed, right? And of course, you always want to notify your references, right? If you haven't used your references for a while, get back in touch and say, hey, it's so good to connect. I'm sorry, I have been out of touch. It's been very whatever. I'm looking at going back to grad school. I'm excited and wondering if you would still be willing to serve as a reference. I would certainly commit to always contacting you, letting you know, and sending you a copy of, if it's job or the school, if it's like for a school one, they kind of maybe know more what to expect, but just, submitting that kind of, letting them know, giving them a heads up. And then every time you do, this is true for jobs, regular jobs with the resume as well, make sure that you give them either a summary of what that job is, or at least the key qualifications that they're really looking for, so that they can talk better about you. And that you always include your CV, or at least that part where it's like right up front. You can include the whole thing, but then in the content of your email, have copied and pasted, right, large, when you worked for them, all of that, because it's a lot more impressive when they're asked, so how do you know them? When did they work for you? Oh, let's see, it was 2000. They can't really get their head around it, versus when they have that person, they come in and they open up the resume. They're like, sure, she was here from 2013 to 2015, was great at da, 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 da. It's much stronger reference, right? So help them help you is what I always say.
I just want to lend a word of support to that. I got lots of requests for both jobs after graduation,
Yeah,
as reference, as well as students going to graduate school. And the way they ask makes a big difference of the kind of reference they get. It really does. And doing those things, I have to tell you that doing those things she mentioned are very rare. And when they do it, it makes a big difference.
it just makes it easier for you, right? It totally simplifies the process, which then you have a better, even better, view of that person. Like, wow, they're so thoughtful. That was really professional to do that. And it makes my job so much easier, because trust me, they get inundated with those things, and people don't always do it like you said. So thank you, Suzanne, for sharing that. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, and it really does make a difference, because no matter what you think, people do tend to forget over time.
Yep. Yep. No, you're absolutely right. Even if they remember you very fondly, 7 years goes by or 5 years, it's hard to keep track. I have a hard time remembering, okay, wait, when was our interns, past ones? Hannah's our current one, and she's amazing. One of our two. And it's like, you get out from that, and it's like, oh my gosh, when were they here? I can't remember. It was. So yeah, that really, really helps. That's awesome. There was another question, I think, that came in about whether or not a study abroad could be used for a job description on a CV or a resume. And my answer to that would be, it depends. I think it could, if you had a component of it. A lot of these study abroad programs have a built-in component where you're actually working with the community, or you're doing volunteer work, which absolutely can go on under professional experience. Volunteer work, paid or unpaid, doesn't matter. Intern or regular employee, all equal in terms of the experience. You can still put that on there, right? So yeah, I think it might, just depending if you were doing some kind of work there, volunteer work, or some kind of, yeah, absolutely. Great. All right. If there's any other questions, please do ask. Just continue to put them in the chat box, or unmute yourself. I'm open to that too. We have a nice small group here, so easy to do that as well. So okay, let's go on here and see. I want you to see a sample. And now what I want to say, I want to preface this, because this is not, I'm not saying, I'm showing you this because of the content. I am not showing you this as my the end all be all of this is what a CV should look like, because I don't think it is necessarily, right? It's not, it's pretty bland, right? I mean, when you, it's everything's left justified, right? And I know you'll talk to some people and they're like, for a CV, you need to do that. Um, you know, but I like what's good and what I wanted. It shows the components, right? So, so like your contact information up front, right? Now I'm gonna, as I go through this, I'm gonna give a little bit. Well, I'll go through the content first, then I'll go through kind of my critique of what I would recommend to change for this kind of a CV. So name up front, and it's the biggest thing on the page. You could probably have a little bigger even than that, but yes. The information, the contact information, it's, you know, that's good to include. Again, you could respace that to have it not take so much space. It takes 4 lines right now, right? I mean, that's like a waste of time if you're, or space, if you're, you know, worried about that. And then this one, notice it goes right into research interests. So if this one was, I believe, for like a research, what do you call it? Adjunct, like a faculty type of position, not a faculty, like full faculty, but a part-time, whatever. And so starting with the research interest right away, right? If that's what they were going for, right? To show them, this is my expertise, this is my, you know, my interest. And then goes into the education, right? I like how all of the headers are all caps, but I would personally make them a little bigger so they pop, because they don't pop that much, right? But under education, you see, you know, reverse chronological. So PhD in Spanish, great. When, where, right? The dissertations included there, right? Your MA, right? Where it's from. There's different ways to put it in order. And if you talk to, you know, 10 people, you're gonna get 10 different opinions generally, right? But I prefer to have the dates to the right. Like, so having PhD in Spanish, University of Houston, and then the date, and then on the next line, maybe dissertation, blah, 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 right? But that's just me. I mean, there's different ways to do it. So I'm not going to pick it completely apart. So then the MA, right, and the BA, so the education's right up front, right? Now, if you had, what they're talking about is too, like if you had additional experiences within your education that you wanted to, you know, whether it's, you know, some kind of maybe, you know, scholarship, honors, awards, you could have that as a separate category, or under education, under the appropriate one with a bullet where it says honors and awards, and you have that there. So there's lots of different ways to kind of, there's more flexibility, I should say, with CVs oftentimes in terms of the order, but they definitely recommend that the education be first and foremost, right? Because it is an academic focused one. And by the way, I used to work in the Career Center actually in a university, and I loved it. It was great. And, you know, when you come out of undergrad, they'll even recommend, oh, you should have your education first and foremost. You're a new grad. That's your most, you know, most important thing that you bring to the table, blah, blah, blah. But as I said earlier, you could be typecast as, you could be stereotyped as, oh, new grad, no experience. And overlooked if you do that as well. For them, the bonus is if it's up front, and not that this is malicious, but it's like, wow, look at this awesome graduate, Hannah, isn't she amazing? Like, you know, she's our graduate. Yes, University of Houston, right? So it helps them out too. So yeah. Appointments, then, you know, she's this in this one, Gloria is going into different appointments. So adjunct lecturer, right? Obviously very related to what, you know, they're going to. Publications, so, you know, goes over, you know, what the publications are, journal, you know, all of that is increasingly important, right? You know, when you're looking at getting into an academic, you know, environment, especially teaching, they want to know what your research is, what your, you know, writings are, all of that kind of thing. Okay. So, and then conference presentations, you know, where you've, you know, presented, you know, including the date, where it was. I would probably do the month if you can, but they're just doing the years down here. I mean, it's probably fine either way. I just kind of like the consistency with up above. But so that's the page one showing, or what I could fit on this, right? And then I just want to have you see the second page here of like teaching experience, right? The biggest, not blooper, but the biggest error that I see in this is they don't have on the second page up above who it is. Imagine if your application, you know, they get it and they print it off and it gets separated, and there goes half of your experience, right? Like, you don't want that to happen. So you always would want to have, you know, your name, your page 2 of 2, maybe your contact information, you know, just in case the other page was lost, whatever. So, you know, something like that. I would say. So under teaching experience, then it has, right? It has what they've, what they've done. But notice, how is this different when you're talking about here teaching experience? How does that look different than a traditional resume that you may be writing? What do you notice about it? You can unmute yourself or you can drop it in the chat box. There's a big difference when I see adjunct lecturer, University of Houston. That's like teaching experience and what's in there. Let's see. Anyone coming in with?
Oh, well, they don't specify. What I would want to know is, was this an entire course? Was this
Right.
one class? Did they teach
Right.
it time? Did they teach it for 5 years?
Yep. There's not even, I don't think there's even, if I'm correct here, I'm looking at this, it doesn't show when they did this. Like, was it for a semester? Was it for a year? Was it for, right? But there's also no, like, someone, Andrea said duties, it's just the course. There's no specifics of what their role was, right? Now, granted, when you're going for, a, academia position, and they know what an adjunct lecturer is, right? So that's probably a little more allowed, but that's a lot different than a resume. If you were doing a resume under adjunct lecturer, University of Houston, you would have a bullet that said, designed, designed, implemented, and evaluated curriculum on for class of however many people. Like, you would have more details, right? But in a CV, it's a little more like, with this kind of thing, you're kind of listing this out. It's not as much focused on like that work experience part. It's more, these education things. Great. And then they go into honors and awards, which is fine. And that's great to have a separate category for. That's just fine. Languages, right? And memberships, affiliations is what it ends with. That's great. Yeah. So with that's what it is. Any questions on this page 2, like content that's in here, focus, when to use it, anything like that? I mean, it's pretty straightforward. And again, I had promised you, as you're coming up with questions, you can put them in the chat box. I'm going to go back and just see the, I wanted to show you. So I did my critique to some degree, right? But as I said, I would have the education high, bigger, right? The different headers bigger, in some of the formatting, having the dates probably more to the right. But I mean, it's got the information, and it's got good information for, a CV for what they're looking for, right? Which can be helpful. So I would bullet down where it has memberships, affiliations. I don't like that there's 3 lines, but they're not bulleted. Bullets are so much easier to read, I just feel like, but I know sometimes people are like, well, maybe they're overused. I don't know. They maybe get tired of them, but I just feel like it's a lot easier. Just boom. So Andrea asks, Andrea, right? Are there specific fonts or sizes that are more successful? It's interesting. The fonts, what I hear for resumes, and I think it crosses over for academia as well, right? One of the fairly conservative ones, right? And that said, there was an article that came out, it's probably been, I bet it's been like 5 years ago, that came out on Times New Roman. And this person said, Times New Roman is the equivalency of wearing sweatpants to an interview. And everybody got all worked up on Times New Roman. You can't have Times New Roman. You got to change something else. But there's so many other ones that you can think of as well, right? I mean, Arial, right? What are some of the other ones that people might think to use that are pretty conservative? I mean, just drop them in the chat box. So Arial, Georgia, I've seen people use. Anything else that you can think of?
Calibri is standard.
Calibri, yes, thank you. I meant to say that one. Yep, I like that one too. So there's several that are more of the, a little more, you don't want anything with like the wingy ding, like, where it's hard to read, right? You want it to be very clear, very crisp, very, and you don't want to go down too small in size either, because you get down below like 10, you get down to, I mean, 10, I think would be the, like, I wouldn't want you to go down below generally 10, but it depends on the font they're in, right? Some fonts look bigger than others. But you get down lower than that, it's just going to look like it's crazy. I know we ordered our holiday card this last year, and, we did it online, of course, and we saw the image, and it looked like it was great. We could read it, it was fine, the whole thing. We got it, and that print, it was so microscopic that literally I could not read it. My daughter, I had her read it to me, and I was like, there's no way I'm sending this to my older relatives. Like, they can't, they're not going to be able to read this. So and that ended up being, I think that was, I didn't realize, because they didn't really emphasize that it was number 8. You were just like smaller, it would automatically fit in. So it wasn't saying what font size it was, but I think it was like 8, and it was just horrible. It was, yeah, not good. So yeah. All right. Let's see. Great. Okay. So let's go. So items not to include in a CV. I want to talk briefly about this, right? Now, and you're going to find, like I said, everything that somebody says, somebody else might say, oh no, I think this is, whatever. But there are some general criteria, right? Or general, agreements. So in general, right, you're anything untruthful, obviously, right? That's a no-brainer, right? Anything untruthful, don't include fluff. People can they can smell that out. Like, you don't want that kind of thing either, right? You don't want the irrelevant personal information, right? You don't need to put, nor should you be disclosing, yes, your name, your contact information, but you're not disclosing necessarily whether you're married, whether you're, your race, whether you're, what additional information that's personal information. You don't really want to include that on your CV.
Okay. Question, pictures in resumes or CVs.
Yep. That was my next point. That's what I was going to get to next, because this graphic says no photo for CV. And what's funny is CV generally is where it's more acceptable. I mean, and some don't recommend it, but it's where it is more recommended. And you look at, in, other countries, they usually have their pictures on their resume or on their CVs, right? Now, their CV, the confusing part is this: you have like CVs, we use resumes here, and then CVs more worldwide, but the worldwide ones that they use are not exactly like an academic CD either, right? I mean, they have a photo, they have some other, other similarities, but there's some more similarities to like resumes as well. So it's very confusing, right? To know, what do I need to submit? What kind do I need to submit? Is it a resume or a CV? But the photos, I'm not a fan. I still go with the not just like in a resume to not have a photo. And yet I see a lot of like graphics when they'll have the little photo, for a resume. And typically for resumes, you don't use photos unless you're going for, something that is like a, I don't know, a game show host, a model or something where, but typically you just don't have the photo on there. But your LinkedIn has a photo, and if it doesn't have a photo, I would strongly encourage you to put a professional type of photo. It doesn't have to be professional who takes it, but a professional photo that's not you trimmed out of, raising a glass of wine or whatever. It's just you and you're kind of close up for your LinkedIn profile. That's where you should have a photo more, because people get a little bit freaked out when people don't have photos. They just automatically assume, is this the real person, or is this what do you call, like a scan, like a identity theft, because so much of that happens as well. So I hope that answers more of your question on photos. Yeah, I'm not a fan of them.
Yes.
Salary. Oh, sorry.
In the context of
Sure.
if the person they were speaking of specifically of women, if it's an attractive woman, they don't want to hire them because of the sexual harassments and Me Too stuff.
Yep. So again, it'd be better not to have that photo, right? Yeah, no, it's, and that's the other fear, is that if there's the pictures on the resumes, the employers fear that they may be sued for whether it's whatever, whether it's, by a female that doesn't get hired, right? It could be, it could be sexuality. It could be, I mean, lots. Not that you're going to necessarily know that in the picture, but like they worry that that pictures like lend themselves more to possible complications and people, difficulties and issues. So salary history, you definitely don't include on your CV or your resume unless it's required. And there are some times that they do require it. It's getting less common, even in federal, believe it or not. In federal, you typically have to include for every job your job title, your highest GS level or whatever level, if you were in federal government before, your employer's name, their contact information, whether or not it's okay to contact them, and your salary. But they're backing off on the salary because there's been a lot of backlash, understandably so. And I'm really glad to see this because unfortunately, women have been oftentimes underpaid. They've started at positions at a lower level, and that haunts them their entire career. Because when they go to a new job, a quote unquote up from that is still not going to be what maybe the males that were hired, at that, point as well. And so it's just, it can be, really, really difficult. So they're starting to not have salary history on there. What they might ask is what your salary requirements are. And if they ask what your requirements are, I recommend generally answering the question, but not giving them a range if you don't know what their salary offering is, right? So you could instead, in your cover letter, for example, to show them that you responded to what they wanted, you could say, in regard to your request for salary requirements, I'm looking for a salary that's commensurate with my XYZ, my master's and X, years of experience in da 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 da. I'm happy to provide more details upon learning the projected range for this position and other benefits. Because let's face it, your salary is not the only benefit, right? I mean, some organizations have amazing benefits. They pay nothing for health insurance, zero, right? So things like that factor into how much, you would, your actual salary, what you'd expect, right? So that's what I have to say on salary history. Any questions on that? When it says here why you left your previous position, I think what they're talking about there is like, you don't owe it to them to say whether you were laid off, whether you were fired, whether you were like, you don't, right? You wouldn't. I know that seems obvious. You just, that you will come up with what, your answer, which will be, an answer that's, not lying and such, if that was the case, about how you learned and have grown from the, the experience and you're, really ready to jump back in or whatever. So, and then references, as I said, generally don't put them unless they really ask for them. I was going to say the explanation of gaps in employment, this one can kind of depend. I think with COVID, I mean, I think everyone knows there's been a lot of people who've lost their jobs and have been without jobs for a very long time. And that's not any indication of you or any reflection on you and your, experience, your qualifications. It just is a pandemic, and it's a global pandemic. And it was just, wow. So I think that's fine. I mean, what I would say is when you talk about your Peace Corps service, if you were an evacuee, I would definitely have as one of your bullets under, maybe your last one, or maybe your first one, if you weren't there very long, you could say assigned to, in Mongolia or whatever it was, evacuated after X months, or evacuated I would probably just say evacuated in March 2020 due to global COVID pandemic, something like that. So they see it that it was short term, because if they, a lot of employers don't even realize that it's like a 2-year commitment usually. So sometimes people get worried if they come home early. Oh, I was only there for 14 months. Is that going to be an issue? That's not necessarily a problem, but yeah, so you can certainly explain that. And then grammatical errors, obviously read it, reread it, have your, friends read it backwards, because the thing is, your mind knows what it's supposed to say. And the problem is you read it as you intended it, right? When you're just reading what you had. I mean, this happens to everyone, I have this happen. I see it as what it's supposed to be. And then I'm like, oh crap, there's a, maybe a space or something, right? Because you know what it's supposed to be. Generally, you don't put your hobbies unless, and sometimes if those are extremely related, let's say you have your pilot license and the person that's the academic, whatever that would be your, your advisor is a pilot as well. You might put that under your certifications, certified pilot, da, 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 da. That could be something that draws them to want to interview you. Okay, great. I'm not going to talk much about this one because this one we did cover last week as well, but other than to say that, use the STAR methodology when you are describing what your job, what you were doing, instead of just, saying, what you did, talk about, it's the situation, the task, right? Or the challenge that could be, the action you took and the results. So for example, if you were in Peace Corps and you were, you maybe designed and implemented, malnourishment or malnutrition program, whatever, with 55 children ages 0 to 3, resulting in blah, 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 like whatever the outcome was, right? Like get that result in there. Make sure that you include your results, or you even have a bullet that's on accomplishments, like, and what you got from that, right? Were you awarded something? Were you, the recipient of, or whatever, did you get a promotion because of it? Those kinds of things. When you got a promotion, you can list it as promoted to program director based on proven performance and dedication, whatever, da, 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 da. So things like that is what I want to say there. You can watch the other one for a little more information on that if you want. But working in, the power words, action verbs are what are key. Don't always say the same thing, but you want to look at when you're, that academic, like what they're focusing on, you want to make sure that those key words are really apparent in whatever you're giving to them. One easy way to do this is to create a word cloud. Has anyone ever created a word cloud? I used to use Wordle. I think it was WORDLE, right? Wordle.com, but there are word cloud generators. All you have to put in for a search in Google, and you'll get free word cloud generators. And what you do is you dump in either the description of the job, for example, right? Or the duty, whatever the job description, and it will produce instantly this word cloud. Have you ever seen like the bigger words? You have like the giant word that says teamwork, and then the small work, whatever. The bigger the word, the more important that word is in that job description or in that program description or whatever. So it's an easy way for you to, at a glance, get a sense of, wow, okay, these are the words that I really need to include, right? And so think about doing those two, the word cloud generators. They can really help a great deal. My one advice would be, don't include like the entire job description. If it's one of those like 15 pages or 10 pages or even 5 pages, get it to the one where it's going to have what you do, what the program's about, and what the requirements are. And just copy and paste that part in, because otherwise you're going to get all these, our university is dedicated to, and it's going to go into a lot of other stuff. So excellent. And I realized that, my goodness, time flies, and it's just after 9 o'clock. So I definitely want to just get to questions that you might have, and answer any final questions you might have before we close up tonight. Are there any questions on what I've talked about what we've chatted about? Anything?
Jodi, yes, there's a question by Suzanne. Can you do a session on issues of women leading in career? I think that's just
I love that, Suzanne. That is fabulous. Suzanne, can you do me a favor and either just send that to me in an email with the,
Sure.
the subject, just, career topic or webinar topic request? That's awesome, because that's what I do at the end of each of these webinars. You just are reading my mind here, Suzanne, I tell you, because this is what I say at the end. Hey, lastly, we do these for you, and we want to make sure that these webinars are something that meet your needs. So if there are other topics that would be helpful to you, let us know. And you can always email me, as I know Hannah shared my email address in the chat box as well. But definitely let us know what we can do. So by women not leaning into their career, like the issues and how to kind of how to confront that, right? How to change that, right? That type of thing, like how to lean in, right?
Oops. Yes, ma'am. I
Great.
mean, I think women do it a lot younger because of
Yep.
pregnancies, but women do it just in general because of the way we're raised
Oh
too.
yeah, totally. Totally. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. That's great. That's great. I will definitely do something on that. We'll figure out when we can do it. And you can always see our events on our event page, which is at peacecorpsconnect.org/events. And you'll see we always do basically 2 webinars a week. We do the career related one on Monday nights, and then thank you, Hannah, for putting that in there. And then on Fridays we do more of a career development, professional development one. At noon now, we have a new time instead of 1 at noon. And then we have the podcast, which this Wednesday, by the way, we are going to have the Path to Politics. We're actually going to feature Samra Brook. Yes, I'm pronouncing it right. I hope. She's the state senator in New York, and she's an RPCV, and she's just really passionate and wants to help. And so it's going to be a really good one. We're allowing a small amount of, for the raw taping of it. If anyone's interested, you're more than welcome. It should be great. We're going to feature her and also Emily Cherniak from New Politics, talking about a bipartisan kind of effort to move things forward. And yeah, it should be great. So I'm really excited to sit down and talk with her on Wednesday. So that's what we have coming up. If you have any other questions, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording now. And then if you do have any other questions, stick around and I'll be happy to answer those. Okay. All right. Thanks, everyone.